On this day, in 1970, we were standing in the grounds of Cardiff Castle, celebrating a huge Mass, as in Rome a great event was taking place. The 40 martyrs were canonized by Pope Paul VI, and 6 of them were our own. Indeed, 2 of them were martyred in Cardiff, not that far from our school. It was on Gallows Hill. It was where the bank now stands, on the corner. And in the church, when I used to serve Mass before going to school in the morning, because it's very close to the school, St. Peter's, there were stained glass windows as one entered, showing the story of the martyrdom of those 2 local Cardiff martyrs, St. John Roberts and St. Philip Evans, including the quaint scene of the call, where one sees that they were being called to the gallows, but they were still in prison, and they were playing some kind of homemade tennis game, and they calmly said, "Could you allow us to finish this game first, please?" And they went calmly to the atrocious death of being hanged, drawn and quartered, as did this great army of martyrs, most of which passed through Tyburn, as did the last of the great army, our own Oliver Plunkett here. Now, the faith was dying out bit by bit in England. It was quite clever, really. There was ambiguity in the Book of Common Prayer, and it could be taken either way. There was the obligation to listen to sermons which were teaching the new doctrine. The bishops who wanted to remain faithful were being deposed, and others were being put in their place. And suddenly something happened. A new brand of priests started to infiltrate. Those formed in the new seminary system put in place after the Council of Trent on the continent, and also the Jesuits. This was the new underground. Just to take one of many, but an important one because he was one of the first of this new wave. It's Cuthbert Maine. He was born in 1544, raised according to the Reformed religion. It's the case of our own St. John Roberts as well. Would have had the same Welsh accent as ourselves, the same area of North Wales. He became a Catholic in Notre Dame. He also was at Oxford. In fact, we celebrated in his chapel there some years ago. His uncle, that is of Cuthbert Maine, was a clergyman, comfortably beneficed, and he intended his nephew to succeed him. He was sent to Oxford to prepare for Anglican ordination, which he received, and he began his pastoral duties in that city. Reminds one of the likes of John Henry Newman. However, at Oxford, he came under the influence of men who had strong Catholic sympathies, particularly Edmund Campion and Gregory Martin. The latter was the main author of the Douay-Rheims translation of the Bible, done precisely in Douay and printed in Rheims possibly, but the Douay Centre was important, and we visited that too. It was a place of resistance, of powerful intellectual work going on in exile. The Benedictines were there, and of course they came back to England eventually. In fact, St. John Roberts was one of the influences in making that happen. And there's a statue of him actually at Downside to this day over the door. Maine soon came to understand that he was in the wrong religion, and he was not left long in doubt what he should do about it. And that's important because one has to look into a doubt which is beginning to be on the horizon. One can't just dismiss it and put it back. It has to be looked into, otherwise one falls into bad faith, and that's not a good place to be in. In fact, Newman does insist that he never sinned against the light. He was faithful to what he was seeing all along. A letter to him on matters of the faith was intercepted by the authorities who ordered his arrest. Cuthbert was out of town at the time, and when his friends got word to him that he was a wanted man, he fled the country. He became one of the earliest students at Dr. Allen's seminary at Douai. And when he finished the rigorous and exhilarating course of priestly formation, he was sent immediately into the devastated vineyard in 1576. When I was in Rome, I was moved by the whole gallery of pictures of martyrs at the Venerable English College. That's why it's called the Venerabile. It's still there where it was, and that's where they were formed. And in fact, when they were coming out after ordination to go on the mission to England, St. Philip Neri would come out of the church of San Girolamo, which is nearly opposite, and he would, I think, actually go on his knees and kiss their feet and say, Salvete flores martyrum, as the beginning of the hymn to the Holy Innocents, Hail, flowers of martyrs. So he began his ministry as the steward at the country house at Francis Fagian in Cornwall. He was able to celebrate there secretly and administer the sacraments. And he reconciled to the church many who had fallen into error. Word of his presence went round. But within a year, the High Sheriff of Cornwall conducted a raid on the house. His search was a success, for Catholics had not yet perfected their systems of lookouts and places of hiding for priests and their equipment. After one of those typical, very irregular trials, he was sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. As for the martyr, after hearing the sentence, he, with a most mild and gladsome countenance, lifting up his eyes and hands unto heaven, only said, God be thanked. It's actually what happened when Oliver Plunkett heard his sentence. He just said, Deo gratias. On the day before his execution, all the justices of that county, with many preachers of the pretended reformed religion, be gathered together at Launceston aforesaid. Cuthbert Main was brought before them, his legs being not only laden with mighty irons, but his hands also fast fettered together, in which miserable case he also remained many days before. When he maintained disputation with them concerning the controversy in religion at this day in question, from 8 of the clock in the morning until it was almost dark, but their labour was all lost, for they could not, with their bitter railing and reproachful speeches, which they poured forth in great plenty, so much as once move him to the least impatience in the world. And that shows actually how to talk in these situations. One doesn't lose control or raise one's voice. It's actually very disarming when one is in complete possession of oneself, because serenity is the best proof that one knows where the truth lies. The next day, the 30th of November, 1577, he was drawn roughly on a hurdle to the marketplace where the knives, the fire, and a very high gibbet were prepared. He was required to climb the ladder backwards and was allowed a short speech. He began with a plea for the innocence of his host, Francis Tregion, and the other laymen. But one of the justices quickly interrupted with an order to put the rope on his neck, and then let him preach afterward. Then he was turned off the ladder abruptly and cut down with his body still, while his body still swung in a wide arc. He fell in such sort that his head first encountered the scaffold, which was there prepared of purpose to divide the quarters, so that the one side of his face was sorely bruised and one of his eyes driven far out of his head. After he was cut down, the hangman first spoiled him of his clothes, and then, in a butcherly manner, opening his belly, he rent up his bowels, and after tore out his heart, the which, as a plausible spectacle, he held up aloft in his hand. Lastly, his head was cut off, and his body divided into 4 quarters, which afterwards were dispersed and set up on the castle at Launceston. 1 quarter sent into a town called Bodmin, the most populous town in Cornwall, another to a town called Barnstaple in Devonshire. Whereabout Maine was born. The third into a town called Tregony, not above a mile distant from Mr. Dragon's house. The fourth into Wadebridge, the most common travelled way in that county. The holy death of this first of the new breed of priests was thus broadcast by the heretics themselves, and the government's harsh policy was further confirmed when the High Sheriff was granted knighthood for his conduct of the affair, that is, for following instructions from London on how to conduct it. The Catholic faith had been well on the way to utter obliteration in England, as happened in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, except for those champions of Christ led by St. Cuthbert Main. Because, in the words of Tertullian, the more you mow us down, the more we grow. The blood of Christians is the seed. So, these are those who suffered. And when in the crypt of Tyburn monastery, where adoration goes on day and night, I could see something of the glory of the Tyburn tree, which they've sort of suggested. And there are so many relics there, and also inscriptions of martyrs as they died. And one feels the power of our faith. Child of an end, chased for the overthrown, dost thou this night recall to whom belong these parts of earth that once to him were made, these silent choirs where once thy feet did tread? Dost thou still hear the echo of this pause in ancient song that long flowed between the pores of heavy stone where buried lies awhile a patient spring, an old familiar smile? Over bintir asadin tadani agovin orvanas govyadi agnavi grimit andon my thoros aurendios tega canari voidros emanam behind agras tregint vedeliast wideroin aglamin non avnara birthin